know, it's quite amazing. When you look at these books, and they're over 65 years old, these scrapbooks, the three ways to remember it, one is by the telesnaps, which are the photographs that were taken off the television screen. One, of course, is through these cuttings, and the other one is a memory. And yet the memory only remembers certain things. So it's good to look at some of these cuttings and remind yourself of what actually happened. And today I'm going to try and remember some of the television series that I did. I had one called Seeing is Disbelieving. Another series was Modern Magic, the David Berglas Party, and numerous others. And of course, on top of that, many individual shows. Let me tell you about some of them. I normally didn't do many children's shows, but my two boys, Peter, who was about 6, and Marvin was 5, they asked me to appear on one of their favorite shows called 5 O'Clock Club. So I agreed, and there were a lot of children in the studio, and I said, I need 2 volunteers. And I looked around and I said, how about you? That was Peter. And I said, and that young man, and that was Marvin. They came up to help me. It looked as if they were just strangers, and I said, oh, how do you do? What's your name? And he said, Peter. And I shook his hand. And then I turned to the other one, and I said, and what's your name? And he was so nervous, he said, yes. I said, Marvin, what a nice name. We have the pictures of them standing next to me, and I'm doing a children's trick for them there. And here's another series which was called The Holiday Show. We had famous guests on, and this particular time we had Terry Thomas. Now, as you know, you will remember Terry had a very wide grin with a big gap between his teeth. And as a joke, I patted him on the back, and apparently his teeth came out, and I'm sure you've seen those chattering teeth that you wind up. Well, I had one of those blacked out in the center so that we'd have the gap, and he pretended to spit it out into my hand where it sat chattering away like that, and he looked like that without teeth until I apparently put them back. But I interacted with lots of different stars like Terry Thomas and Ted Ray and Charlie Chester and Jimmy Edwards and Bob Marcus and so on. And here's another series that I had called Seeing is Disbelieving. And one of the routines that I did was the musical mind reading act. I had a number of instruments standing next to me. Someone could think of an instrument, somebody else thought of a tune, and I would then play it on that instrument. On this particular picture, I'm playing the piano, there I'm playing the drums, but I played all these instruments, not very well, but well enough for people to recognize the tune they were thinking of. Another series was one called Star Time. Again, we had many top names appearing on it. On this one, I'm working with Bob Monkhouse. It was a gag where I did a mathematical formula to show that whichever way you added up, there was always one number extra. So he said that means you could do it with pounds, and you'd have a pound each time you do that. And I said, absolutely, that's how I got rich. So he said, could you spare a pound for a cup of coffee? And I said, well, not really, but you can have a cup of coffee. And I produced from midair a hot steaming cup of coffee and gave it to him. That was a gag. On one particular program, we decided to use camera tricks openly. Normally, a magician would say there are no camera tricks involved, and David Nixon, who has a long-running series, always made a point to say there's no switchcraft, no camera tricks. But on this program, we told the audience we're going to mix our kind of magic with what he called switchcraft. There was a well-known comedian and singer called Benny Lee looking in a mirror and shaving. And as he shaved the shaving soap off his face, it turned into David Nixon. And he spoke to him, and David spoke back to him. And then it faded, and David Nixon's face changed to my face, and Benny said, now from David in the looking glass to David Berglas. We winced a bit, but that was the program, and then we went on to other things. But that was the one time when the TV Times said the magicians are going to use camera tricks quite openly. In 1955, a series which was really popular was by the well-known conductor Eric Robinson. He not only conducted the orchestra, but he hosted the show. Incidentally, his daughter, Vivian, was married to David Nixon, and he invited me to be the guest on the show. Now, I had just acquired a little dog called Tricky. It was 4 months old, and I decided to use him in the following way. I produced a fake rabbit, which I strapped with rubber band round its paws to put a symbol on each paw, and this was a wind-up rabbit that could clap its paws, and the cymbals would crash together and played my signature tune, like that. I put that in full view in a large box which looked like a radio, an old-fashioned radio, with a transparent front, and suddenly I opened it and there was a real rabbit still clapping the cymbals, again to my tune. I said, but now with television coming along, you know, radio is going to the dogs. And there was a flash, and the rabbit turned into a little pup, which was my dog, Tricky. And then I took him out, and I did a trick with him. I asked Eric Robinson to think of one of many phrases, like eat your dinner, and have your food, and have your grub, and so on. And I told the viewers that this was a 4-month-old puppy, and I'd been very cruel. I hadn't fed him all day, and he's very hungry, but he's very obedient, and he can read minds. He's sitting in front of a bowl of his favorite food, and I told Eric to think of one of the phrases and then mix them up with the others and suddenly say the phrase he's thinking of, which he wrote on a board, but we couldn't see what he'd written. So he said, eat your food, and nothing happened. He said, have your grub, nothing happened. Eat your dinner, eat up, nothing happened. Then he said, grub's up. Suddenly the dog's ears went out. He sat up and he started eating. So I said, as you could see, he reacted to grub's up. What were you thinking of? And he turned the board around, and sure enough, that's what he thought of. Now I had literally hundreds of letters of people saying that couldn't be a 4-month-old dog because you can't train a 4-month-old dog. But I really had. All I did was to teach him only to eat when he heard the word grub's up. I had to somehow get Eric Robinson to say that he wasn't aware of how I did it, and it worked, but it caused a sensation because people didn't believe that the dog was that young. In 1956, the Shepherd's Bush Empire, which had been a well-known variety theatre, was turned into a television studio. And the producer said, on bank holiday in August 1956, we are putting on our first show and we want you to do something very special. Can you think of something? And I had seen a sports program where they had a split screen. They showed a race course and the studio at the same time, and that had never been done in light entertainment. So I asked, could we possibly do that between two studios? One was in Manchester, which is about 200 miles from London, and the other one was the Shepherd's Bush Empire. I'd asked them to invite their local bank manager in Manchester, as well as a celebrity. The commentator was a man well known on television called Peter West, and the celebrity that he just picked as he came into the building was Cyril Washbrook, a well-known cricketer. I spoke to him from London. Remember, these are all live shows. And I asked Cyril Washbrook if he had any treasury notes on him. He opened his wallet and took out a £5 note, which was a very large note in those days. He took out a £1 note and a 10-shilling note, and he put them on the table. I asked him to pick one freely. He picked up the 10-shilling note. I said, before we do anything, please hand that to the bank manager, which he did. He looked at it and I said, would you pass it in your bank? He said, yes, of course, it's a genuine note. Would you read out the number, please? Which he did, which was recorded on a blackboard. And then I said to Peter West, just for identification purposes, take a pin, which he'd already had on the table, and make a pinprick secretly into the note somewhere so we can recognize it again. Then it was folded in half again. I asked if anybody had a cigarette case. The bank manager had one, and so did Peter West. They took it out. We used Peter West's cigarette case. He put the 10-shilling note in. I said, well, take out the cigarettes first. There were 7 cigarettes, which he put in his pocket, put the 10-shilling note in the cigarette case, closed it up, and held it in full view of the camera. Meanwhile, in London, I had shown a small little tube to a man standing next to me who was a very famous detective called Fabian. They made a television series called Fabian of the Yard. In America they called it Fabian of Scotland Yard.
This is Fabian of Scotland Yard.
He was a real detective who had become a television personality. And I asked him to examine the tube, which was empty, and I said, do you know what that is? And he said, it's probably one of your latest newfangled gadget for magic. I said, no, it's the extension of our garden hose. If you want to extend one hose to the other, you put that brass tube in and then you connect them up. He laughed and I said, as long as it's empty, hold it between a thumb and forefinger in full view. And he'd also put a little label on it with his initials on. We had also invited the bank manager of the Bank of England to stand on the other side of me. So at this moment we saw a split screen with Manchester, somebody holding the cigarette case, and London, the hand holding the tube. I said, I'm going to count to 3, and on the count of 3 something amazing would happen. I counted to 3, they opened the cigarette case, and it wasn't amazing because the 10-shilling note was still there. I said, of course, I forgot the drum roll. Now we had a big orchestra in the studio in London, so I asked for a timpani roll, and then whoop, whoop. And I counted 3 again, a little more dramatically. They opened the cigarette case in Manchester, and the 10-shilling note had gone, and it was back holding 7 cigarettes. Peter West automatically went to his pocket where he put the cigarette and just shook his head. Then in London, I told Fabian to look at the tube. I said, is there anything inside? He said, oh yes, there's a piece of paper. I said, push it out. He pushed it out, opened up, there was a 10-shilling note. I said, hand it to the bank manager, please, in London. He did. He said, it's a genuine note. And I said, would you read out the number, please? And the number was exactly the same as the one they had recorded in Manchester. And then I had an afterthought. Of course, Peter West had put a pinprick and said, Peter, where did you put that pin? He said, well, the first number of the index number was a 9, and I put the pinprick right in the center of the 9. So I asked the bank manager to hold it up to the light, and sure enough, he said there was a pinprick in the number 9. Well, I was one of the few lucky ones who was aware that telesnaps existed. I know many artists who regretted not having that service because otherwise we would have had no record of these shows.
Take a note. Magician David Burglass, who makes it a habit to do apparently impossible tricks, did it again in the BBC television programme The Holiday Show. Under the noses of 2 currency experts and a former senior detective of Scotland Yard, he transferred a marked 10-shilling note from Manchester to London in less time than it takes to say, it can't be done.
Well, I hope that gives you something to think about. I don't make any claims, supernatural powers, paranormal powers. I'm a magician, so there is always a logical explanation, but it's not easy to work out. Remember, the celebrity, Cyril Bushbrook, the cricketer, was chosen at random. He could have taken out of his wallet any note. He took a £5 note, a £1 note and a 10-shilling note, and he had a free choice. He decided on the 10-shilling note. The serial number was checked by a bank manager and read out and recorded in Manchester. And then the same number turned up on the 10-shilling note that appeared in London. Also the pinprick was made very secretly in Manchester, and yet it was on the note in London. So there are many possibilities, and if it's made you think, I'm very glad, because that's what magic is all about.